Hello, my name is Dan Mattock, and I'm an intern with Dr. Greg Rabb, Professor of Social Science and Business here at JCC. I'm here with Honours students Aimee, Zynda, and Bagul, Mammedova to share with you the preliminary results of our study funded by the Nathan Public Policy Fellowship, awarded to Professor Rabb by the SUNY Rockefeller Institute for Local Governance in Albany. We're the first and only community college to be awarded this fellowship. In our study, we looked at the budgets of 8 small Western New York cities and talked to their mayors and city managers to try and find out what some cities are doing to improve their financial situation and eventually find some strategies to try and help them out ourselves. Unfortunately, our study was cut short by the COVID-19 pandemic and we were unable to interview everyone that we were hoping to do. So let's get started. I'm going to skip through a few of these slides because we don't have a lot of time. But the fiscal monitoring system provides an early warning for the fiscal stress to local governments. The system has two main components: financial indicators evaluate the ability of a locality to generate enough revenue to meet expenses, and environmental indicators capture the trends that influence revenue-raising capability and demands for service. So essentially, financial indicators are what the government can control, and environmental indicators are what the government cannot control. So significant stress was considered 65 points or greater, and susceptible to stress was 45 points or greater. Of the 8 cities we studied, the mean fiscal score was 11.1 and the mean environmental score was 27.9. So going down to Jamestown, our first city, the biggest of the cities that we studied, the fiscal score was 31.3, environmental score was 50. So they're in quite a bad situation. Moving down to Lockport, we have a fiscal score of 0 and environmental score of 3.3, which was actually the best city that we studied. Batavia, we're going to move down to Batavia, which has a fiscal score of 3.3, environmental score of 26.7. Olean has a fiscal score of 17.5, an environmental score of 23.3. And Geneva had a fiscal score of 5, an environmental score of 20. Dunkirk has a fiscal score of 21.7, environmental score of 50, so they're actually doing not great as well. And then Canandaigua has a fiscal score of 0 and environmental score of 10. Canandaigua actually gave us a lot of trouble. They have a really big budget with a really small population, and it would have been great to be able to talk to John Goodwin, which we didn't unfortunately get to do. Then moving on to our last city, the smallest of all of them, Hornell, which had a fiscal score of 9.6 and environmental score of 40. I'm going to pass it on to Aimee now, who's going to...
I will be covering the points of all the cities compared to the city of Buffalo and some questions that we ran into when researching. The best way to digest everything that Dan explained is to use the fiscal and environmental scores of a big city near us to compare to the other 9 scores. The chart above was made by Ms. Pilato, who's the multimedia specialist on this project. As seen in the chart, all 9 cities are being compared to the city of Buffalo. Using Buffalo as a comparison shows how much fiscal and environmental stress these cities are put under with different variables such as population, expenses, and revenues. As you can see, the environmental stress, represented in the color orange, of Jamestown and Dunkirk are very similar to the environmental stress of Buffalo. All 3's environmental stress is around the score of 50, with Buffalo's being the highest at 53.3. Moving on to the fiscal stress, you are able to see that the 3 cities that have the highest fiscal scores are, again, Jamestown, Dunkirk, and Buffalo. These scores range from 21.7 to 31.3, with Jamestown having the highest fiscal stress score at 31.3. When looking at all these scores, it became apparent that we should ask questions in order to fully understand the financial status of these cities. Before heading out to interview any city official, we first made a list of questions that we had for them. Overall, we had 10 questions to ask each city, along with a couple of questions pertaining to the city individually. Some questions that we had for the 9 cities were to describe what continues to be the biggest fiscal challenges you face, which causes you the most concern, what needs to be done to continue to keep your city in good financial status, and what should both the state and the county do to address and improve fiscal issues. Many of the personal questions were about certain unknown labelings of groups, what certain expenses contain, and employees and what their contractual benefits are. Ending with that, I turn over to Bagul, who will touch on the ranks of the city's expenses and revenues.
Hello, let me now talk about the revenue and expenses ranking of individual cities. The ranking of the expenses and revenues was important as part of our project because that way we could distinguish, compare, and conclude why some cities have less fiscal stress while others don't. As it is obvious from the ranking table, there are some similarities among cities. For example, the number one revenue source for individual cities is property taxes, which, as we say, is true for almost all of them. However, as we were researching, we also came across some sharp differences in the revenue rank, particularly in the fourth and fifth, which indicates cities depend on various sources as their fourth and fifth most income. As for expenditures, there are five types of them, which cities spend the most money on, such as personnel, which is wage and salaries, workers' compensation, which is financial aid to employees, healthcare insurance, retirement, and Fiscal, which is Medicare or Social Security taxes. We calculated what percentage these expenditures compose of the total city budget, and we could see which cities had the highest percentage and the lowest percentage depending on their individual expenditures. Even though our project was cut short because of the COVID-19, we were able to gather essential information and draw conclusions as to why some cities have higher fiscal and environmental scores and some don't. And based on their revenues and expenses, we could see how they are managed. That being said, it concludes our presentation. Thank you for listening.